on. All right, sorry. Okay, so I think that let's start with talking about Judaism and Christianity. Do we share a common God, values, contemporary social concerns? And let's just start by looking at the values that we share, the God that we share. We do believe that we share a common God, but in Judaism, we believe that there's one God and that God is a unity. So we don't believe in terms of Christianity, the Trinity is not something that's a Jewish view or a Jewish belief. And it's an interesting question as we start to look at that and to raise that question as to what God is in Judaism and the idea of the Trinity. And I often have people ask me, what do Jews think about Christians? And do Jews think that Christians are wrong? Do Jews think Christians are right? How does that intersect with Judaism? And I think that because we live in America, Jews are forced to think about Christianity a lot. But if Jews didn't live in America, we probably wouldn't think about Christianity very often, if that makes sense, because Judaism is different from Christianity. We, as you know, we have the Torah and we have the Hebrew Bible, and then we have many further texts, the Midrash, the Mishnah, the Talmud, which we'll be studying about in the next several weeks. But we obviously, we don't, not only do we not have what Christians refer to as the New Testament, we don't accept that as our tradition. Most Jews are not even familiar with the New Testament, and it's kind of peripheral to what we believe. And I would say that, and the reason I bring that up is because similarly, we believe in one God and that God is a unity, and most Jews wouldn't even be familiar with the concept of Trinity unless we only are because we live in, right now in America, we live in a place where there are a lot of Christians, where the predominant religion is Christianity. So I like to explain it that way. Any questions, thoughts about that? Anybody?
Maybe it might be more universal if Jews are in the Middle East, or like even back in the day when Christianity was being founded, they might think about Christianity and why it challenged Judaism.
It's interesting, and I understand what you're saying. I actually like what you're saying. I don't think most Jews feel as though Christianity challenges Judaism. I think Christians might feel as though Christianity challenges Judaism. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense or if that addresses kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to backtrack to the ancient world, but it's fair.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think that, yes, probably when Christianity was being founded, there were definitely challenges to Judaism. But for most Jews, we don't think that much about Christianity in the sense of, are we right or wrong? Is Christianity right or wrong? It's just not part of our daily life, except that it becomes part of it because we happen to live in a country that is predominantly Christian. But I think you're right that it probably does come up. I mean, I'm sure it came up in Europe because, again, it's predominantly a Christian society. But Jews who live in Muslim countries probably don't think about Jesus or think about Christianity very often. They might think about the differences between Islam and Judaism. but not necessarily the differences between Judaism and Christianity. You know, I think we're forced to think about the differences between our own religions and the religions that are within our purview. So I think, and I don't know if that answers what you were saying, Robert.
Yeah, just I wonder if it's their cousins or something, where because Christianity emerges out of Judaism and because Christianity recognizes the truth of Judaism, I don't know what the right word is, but there, because there's a closeness in their monotheisms, I feel like Jews are more likely to think about Christianity and Islam because of that.
It's an interesting question. Um, I don't know that, like, most Jews barely think about Islam. Because we're not living in America. In Israel, it might be different, but most Jews in America don't know much about Islam. Probably know very little about Islam. I would say the bulk of Jews know little about Islam. And actually, many Jews know very little about Christianity, except they know that Christians think that Jesus is the Messiah. And most Jews know that that we live in a predominantly Christian country. But I don't think Jews know a lot about Christian theology. I don't think, I mean, I might be wrong on that, but unless if they've gone to, a lot of Jews end up going to like Catholic schools because that might be the best school in their neighborhood and it's a private school and the public schools may not be as good. So then they'll learn more about it because that's the school that they happen to go to that is a Catholic school, if that makes sense. Yes, Carissa.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but you can correct me. Can you speak to how I always thought, and I've read that Christianity, especially after the Second Temple was destroyed, was a response, and then like Rabbinic Judaism was also another response to the temple not being there.
I would definitely agree that Rabbinic Judaism was a response to the temple being destroyed, because in biblical times, and we'll talk more about that in a couple weeks, but in biblical times, there had always been this idea that we have a covenant with God. Part of that covenant is that I will be your God, you will be my people, and we will live in God, Torah, and Israel, and we'll live in Israel. And, this is our land that God has given us. And so that when the temple was destroyed and we were exiled from Israel, it was definitely a huge crisis within Judaism, because what does that mean? Does that mean that God is no longer our God? Does it mean that we're being punished by God? What does that mean? And so that was a huge crisis within Judaism as to how to deal with that. I think that's an excellent question. And I think the Jewish response in a more simplistic way was, well, we were being punished because we didn't observe the mitzvot in the proper way, or not everybody did, or not as many people should have observed the mitzvot properly. And so this is a punishment that the temple is destroyed and that we're exiled from the land, and that's why within Judaism, that idea of Zionism, of Israel as our land, the land that God gave us, is such a deeply held idea, principle, concept. So I think you're right in that, in terms of Judaism. I think in terms of whether Christianity was also that response, I think it could have been. I think that there were certainly a lot of people looking for a Messiah at that period. when Christianity was born. Because the idea being that when the Messiah comes, there'll be the land, the life will be perfect, everything will be much better, and we as a people will be restored to the land of Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I would agree with you that there were a lot of looking for the Messiah during that time. Sorry. Sorry about that. Hold on just 1 second, if you could.
One thing I'm still thinking
Sorry
about
about
is,
that. Go ahead, sorry, Robert.
oh, no, I was just trying to fill the air, but I'm still thinking about whether the cousin thing works and whether, like, they've got differences like the Trinity, but they share the Old Testament in common, and a lot of Christians seem to know the Old Testament really well.
Yeah. I think it depends on, I think that, again, I think that from a Christian point of view, there may be more Christians who and I'm not sure about that actually, but there may be more Christians who would call us cousins. I think that, again, I think that Jews, if Jews are pushed, most don't know a lot about Christianity, and I don't know, maybe they would recognize us as cousins. I just don't think we think about it that much. And also, I think Jews have faced a lot of anti-Semitism throughout the generations, through the Christian church or the Catholic Church, depending on where in history we are. And so I don't know that Jews are looking to try to be cousins, if that makes sense. Jackie?
Something I heard is that there were like sister religions, but the thing I've noticed is like most sisters don't try to, I guess, take out the other sister in most families.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Something I've noticed is that most sisters don't try to take out their sibling during the family.
Yes, I think that's a very, very good point. And so I think that when that happens, then the Jews who have that, because that's been happening over and over again, their Jews aren't necessarily looking to be family. Not that Jews are looking, within Judaism, we don't believe that other religions are wrong or bad. We just know that they aren't, for us, what we believe or our truth. So I think that goes kind of to what you're saying, Jackie, which is that whereas, like, for example, and this is not a value judgment on Christianity, it's believed that those who don't accept Jesus as the Messiah in most Christian denominations, not all, because there's a huge, vast difference between different Christian denominations, but in many, if you don't accept Jesus as the Messiah, you are going to go to hell. And so when people try to convert Jews, it's really their belief. Those who do that and believe that they're saving Jews for Jews, we don't believe that others have to believe what we believe and that others have to accept our God. There's never been that idea. And there are probably a number of historical reasons for that as well. I don't necessarily believe it's because Jews have this great higher insight. It's probably because throughout the generations, we have lived in countries where we're in host countries. And if we went around proselytizing, I don't think we've been kicked out from country to country anyways. And if we went around proselytizing the people in those countries, then it was going to be even worse for us as Jews. So it probably wasn't a very attractive idea to proselytize. And it wasn't a very safe idea. So
Right.
that could have a part of the reason why why Jews have never believed in proselytizing. So it may not be that it's some lofty principle. It could be a matter of preservation also. But Judaism has never felt that others are going to be burning in hell, for example, if they don't accept our beliefs. And so I think that is part of the reason, but we just have never felt that others have to accept our beliefs. And we also don't think a lot about what are going to happen to those who don't accept our God as God. I think the only reason, mostly in modern times at least, that Jews think about the other religions in comparison to Judaism. One is because I think there's a lot of interest in interfaith dialogues. That's one reason. But the other is because we are living in host countries where we are confronted with that.
Yeah, like Moldova was one of those countries, if I remember correctly.
Say that
Country I
again,
was born.
Andy? What
Sorry,
is-
Moldova, the country I was born in, was one of those host countries, if I remember correctly.
Got it.
Moldova.
Yes.
Moldova.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I would believe it. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting question.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm missing the point, but like I get that in Western countries, like is it that there's no imperative in Judaism to think about other countries? Are there major ethical differences? Does Judaism have a position on how to react to other religions?
Clarify a little bit more what you mean by that question.
Well, I just I can't help but think a lot of it's not just living in America that people get Christianity. You get it through art, you get it through music, you get various ideas passed on. It's part of the air. You see cathedrals. I it's I I I can't help but feel like there's so many commonalities as well in just sharing a history together.
Do you mean sharing in the sense of learning or believing that we have a common history?
Well, I'm sorry I'm fumbling here a little bit, but
And I don't mean to be challenging or pushing more. I really
yeah.
don't.
It's I don't know, it's just striking to me that Christianity shoots off of Judaism, so they're in common up until that moment. And then they branch off and have their different histories, but they share everything pre-zero. And
Well, they share it in the sense that well, actually, yes and no. So Judaism, Christianity was not all peoples who became Christians were Jews. There were Greeks who became Jews, Romans. It was during the Roman Empire, really. So they weren't Jews. There were actually, with the Roman Empire became a Christian empire.
Yeah,
And I would actually say that one of the reasons that that Christianity persecuted or says that the Jews killed Jesus was because most of the Roman Empire eventually became Christian, and it would have been a real problem if the truth was the Romans killed Jesus, right? I mean, most people would agree that it was the Romans who killed Jesus, and Jesus was crucified, which was a common method of murdering people who were enemies of the state during the Roman Empire. But it would have been a very, very problematic to the theology of the Roman people and to having the Roman people accept Christianity as their tradition if people were like, oh, you killed Jesus and Jesus is our God, is part of the Trinity. Jesus is our God, and you killed the God that you're going to then worship. It would have been quite problematic, which is probably why the myth that Jews killed Jesus arose, when in reality it was the Romans who killed Jesus. And I don't know if that really addresses anything that you're talking about, but
no, I understand, Pontius Pilate, but
right.
all right, I just think they accept the Ten Commandments, right?
Yep.
So, like, is there a major ethical difference, do you think?
It's a great question. I would actually love to throw that out as a question to everybody. What are some of the major ethical differences between Judaism and Christianity, or are there any? Jackie, and then Christian.
Something I've noticed, like, that I've learned is, like, in talking to Rabbi Brian before, Jews are more like the actions have like the impact, and not just like the just saying you'll do something and then not doing it doesn't exactly have the impact like actually following through with your action is what they're more concerned with what you do than, like, I guess, what you like believe. Is that the right way to say that?
I think that's a very good way to put it, is that that while it's not, we believe in Judaism that thoughts can lead to actions, it's the actions in the end that matter more than the thought, that more than what you think. If you think something but you don't act on it, that's not, you haven't broken a commandment, for example. It's not, the commandment isn't, you shouldn't think about murder. I mean, this is obviously an extreme one, but you should, I'll do a less extreme. You shouldn't, the commandment isn't don't think about stealing, it's don't steal. So you haven't done wrong for thinking about stealing if you stop yourself and you actually don't steal. And I think that's kind of what you're saying now. And I'm not saying Christianity doesn't, I mean, I know you think about it, but I think Judaism is much more about your actions than about your thoughts. I think that's true. Christian has hand up also, and then Carissa, you had yours up.
Okay. Am I there? Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You know,
Sorry, I didn't
I grew
realize
up-
I kept saying yes, and I didn't realize I was muted.
Having grown up Christian, what I find very difficult to understand in this conversation in a way is I feel maybe it's my entourage or the people I know, but it seems like most Christians don't really know much about Judaism. It's sort of like this, they know it's, but they're not involved. I think Jews are more interested in what's happening around, even they're not, but in a way, Christians always seem to be closed in. And so they really, that's what I feel. I don't know if it's relevant to what we're talking about, but
I actually think you're right. I think Jews and Christians don't know a whole lot about each other when you
Yeah.
say that. I think you are right about that.
so we're having this conversation, but it seems like it's, it's each side is one-sided, so it kind of, I don't know.
I just, I hear what you're saying. I get that perspective. It's just they share the Ten Commandments in common. They share the
Yeah.
book of Genesis in common.
Except that
Creation.
in Judaism, it's not just about the 10 commandments. We have 613 commandments that we're supposed to follow, and the 10 commandments are only 10 of them.
That's
and literally
they at least
them.
they at least know that much, right? And
What
some
do you mean
dutiful
they
Christians.
what do you mean they at least know that much?
Well, they're not so. If they know that much, then it's not that they don't know a whole lot about each other, right? They know a great deal. What's in the Old Testament?
They might know, but they don't know at the same time.
That's a good point, and maybe it's just widespread cultural ignorance is the problem.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Graciously.
I would agree with that. I think there is very widespread cultural ignorance. I would definitely agree with that. But I think that what's most important with this, and I think kind of where I was going with what I was saying, which is that there is I think that while Jews share a common God, we believe in God as a unity. Christianity believes in the Trinity. Jews don't. Doesn't matter, yes or no. And I don't think Jews see, again, I don't think Jews think about that much, but I think that there is a lot that we could learn about each other. And I think that in general, I would agree with what Christian's saying, that there is a lot of cultural ignorance. But again, I want to go back though to, I think what Robert said is very important, in that Judaism is very much, up until the modern times, Judaism was very much a system of living that was built around following the 613 mitzvot or commandments, and living a life that looking for holiness, or what we would say kedusha, holiness in life, and trying to make each and every day holy and special, and doing what God expects us to do. So I think that was more what Judaism rests on, or rested and has rested on throughout time. Today we can say there's some differences to that, but or some historical changes, but I think that would be more the basis of what Judaism is and has always been. Yeah, Carissa, you had a question.
It's irrelevant now, but I think in thinking about Christianity, it's also important that Christianity, with its theology today, really didn't start until the Apostle Paul spread it to the Gentiles.
That is
like Jesus and his followers were a very, very small group who were Jewish and did follow the 613 commandments. And then the Apostle Paul, who never even met Jesus, only encountered him in a vision in the book of Acts, if you spread Christianity. And so there's in the really early Christianity, like the followers of Jesus, his disciples, and then Christianity that spread to the Gentiles. And so the Apostle Paul, when he's crafting writing a lot of the New Testament books. His challenge is how to get Judaism, the ideas behind monotheism, to people who aren't Jewish, that are pagan. So I think that's where Christianity splits off from Judaism, is when when Paul takes it to the across the world, because now he's no longer appealing to a Jewish audience, but he's appealing to a pagan audience and has to convince them to worship one God.
It's absolutely true. I would agree with you 100%. I think that's very relevant to what we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, Jesus considered himself a Jew always, which is, yeah, I would agree with everything you're saying. And maybe it would be valuable
I
to
think you
look
cut
at it.
out Rabbi Sue.
Whoops, is that better?
Yes, it's better.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, that's actually, and I think maybe to look at what were some of those changes that had to come about in Christianity to make it to appeal to the broader audience, I think would be a great, would be important to look at, because even more so as that happened is where Judaism and Christianity split even more. So I would agree with that. Yeah. So what were some of those, Jackie, of your hand?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're gonna cover this later, but what about it's good? I don't mean to come off as like not knowing anything, but I probably don't, obviously, because I'm taking this class. But
None of us do, so it's okay.
okay, sorry. What about messianic Jews? Like they believe Jesus is the Messiah. Is that like not a thing? Jews for Jesus is not a thing, or is that later on in our
No, that's a great
study?
question. Jews for Jesus is not a Jewish group. We
Right.
don't accept Jews for Jesus or Messianic Jews as being Jewish. They would, Jews for Jesus was actually started, the movement was started as a way to convert Jews to Christianity by saying that you could accept, you could still be Jewish, that Judaism is your culture and your heritage, but that you can now accept Jesus as the Messiah, but accept your Jewish heritage, your Jewish background, and your Jewish culture, depending on who you would, which messianic movement you want to accept. And then you could do that and then and still be Jewish. And that's what Jews for Jesus was about. And like I said, it was really an attempt to convert Jews to Christianity. So it really is not a Jewish movement at all, and was not intended to be a truly Jewish movement. And Jews wouldn't accept any type of messianic Jewish movement as Jewish. That's a great question, Jackie. Really.
Yeah, that's what my mom's friends were trying to tell me. I was like, no, I don't think that's right.
Correct. You are
Yeah.
correct.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a
No,
kind of
it's
tangent.
actually
I'm
one of the,
sorry.
no, it's a good question, because it is one of the questions that we asked today and that we talk about today. It's actually one of the questions we have written on our questions on the questions for the week. So I'm glad you brought it up and glad that you asked it. It's a very important question.
Thank you. I just want to be weird about it, like, and kind of like be kind of weird about it, if you know what I mean. Just kind of like say it without like sounding like rude, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Sorry. Sorry that came off kind of weird.
No, I think it's an excellent question. I don't think it came off weird at all, because we actually asked, what is Jews for Jesus and why is it not a legitimate Jewish movement, is one of the questions that one of our questions for discussion today. So you've asked an important question, and I think it gets at a lot of the different basic, like if we look at question 7, are there significant differences between Judaism and Christianity in a number of their views? And I think it's important for us to move on and talk about some of those. And when we look at our beliefs in the role of the clergy, for example, in Judaism, the word rabbi means teacher. there's nothing that I as a rabbi can do that anybody else who's Jewish can't do, other than sitting on a Beit Din, a rabbinical court, because you have to be a rabbi to sit on a rabbinical court. But other than that, like in terms of a Jewish marriage traditionally, now, again, there are differences in America because of American law. And we do have a principle in Judaism that the law of the land is the law wherever we live. Malchuta dedina malchuta is the way you say it in, but anyways, that the idea that that the clergy, like a Jewish wedding, what makes a Jewish wedding legal is the exchange of when the groom, and again, this is traditional Jewish law, when the groom hands the bride a ring and says in Hebrew, with this ring you're consecrated to me according to the laws of Moses and Israel. That's what makes a Jewish wedding legal. So really that can be done in the presence of any witnesses. You don't need a rabbi traditionally. Again, laws in America are different. Laws that we're living in now are different, but you don't need a rabbi in order to marry somebody to make it a legal wedding in traditional Jewish law. Again, I'm saying in traditional Jewish law, things like bar or bat mitzvah, you don't need a rabbi. A bar or bat mitzvah happens when you're called to the Torah for the first time, to have an aliyah, to recite the blessing and to read from the Torah. That's the bar or bat mitzvah. You don't need a rabbi to make that legal or anything like that. Baby naming, again, a baby's given a name. You don't have to have a rabbi. Again, today we do it with rabbis, but traditionally you don't. So the role of the clergy is very different because
Rabbi Sue,
yeah, sorry, I know I just cut out. Sorry about that. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna tell you you were muted.
Yeah, I realized that I accidentally had my finger over the thing and it went on the mute thing, and I didn't realize it until a minute later. Sorry. So, but anyway, so in Christian clergy, most, again, not all, because you can't generalize across Christianity because there's so many different denominations, but in general, the clergy member plays a role where most life cycle events have to be presided over by a clergy person. Again, not all, but most. And then similarly, the clergy person is going to be responsible for most final, what's the right word? Most final decisions, has much more of a, I guess for the lack of a better word, much more of a priest-like role than the rabbi does in Judaism. Any questions, any thoughts about that? And then I'll go on with some of the other differences that we can mention or talk about. Okay. If we look again and if we look at the liturgy, again, services, for the most part, anybody can lead a service in Judaism. It doesn't have to be a rabbi, even for the high holiest day, even for the high holy days, for the holiest of days. Most church services will be led by a clergy member, a clergy person in most denominations. And in the liturgy, we don't even have in Jewish liturgy or thought, we really don't have anything about the rabbi. We do in our Mishnah and the Talmud, you hear rabbis talked about, and rabbis who are discussing Jewish law, but not rabbis having a role over and above the people, if that makes sense. And in terms of, any questions with that in terms of our liturgies? And in our liturgy in Judaism, we're praying to God directly. There's no intermediary between the individual and God. You pray directly to God. Jackie.
This is a kind of, I guess, weird question, but are all the services on like the Shabbat services, like not the Erev Shabbat, but the Saturday services, are those all in Hebrew?
It
Just
depends.
wondering.
That's a great question, and it depends where. So the traditional language of our prayer is Hebrew, but it depends on where and which denomination. You'll have more or less English based on where you are, in terms of, like, in a Reformed service, you'll probably have more English than in like a conservative or an Orthodox service. But all I don't want to say all, most Jewish services, the vast majority of them, sorry, will have Hebrew at least in them. And they may be 100% in Hebrew, or they may be partially in Hebrew. And in the morning service on Shabbat, if you pray more than 3 days a week, on Monday, on 2 other days of the week, you're gonna be reading from the Torah in Hebrew. Did that answer what you were asking, Jackie?
Yeah. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Really good questions. Anything else in terms of liturgy or clergy person's roles? Okay. In terms of salvation, redemption, any thoughts on that? First, if we want to, does anybody want to share with us, like, what would Christianity say about salvation, redemption? What would be a Christian view of that? Anybody? Jackie.
Christians believe that, like, if you believe in Jesus, if you say you do all this stuff, like you have to do all these prayers, all these confessions, or like, oh, you're forgiven, you're saved, all that kind of whole, you're saved if you accept Jesus. But I think in Judaism it's more kind of like repentance, kind of like making over the mistakes that you made and making them right, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's
What I've noticed.
but yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Sorry.
in Judaism, it's not, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. And you're saying it's not, you can't just say, like, I accept such and such a thing and therefore I'm redeemed or saved. In Judaism, it's about how we live our lives, kind of what, and you said this before, Jackie, and you're right. It's about how we live our lives each and every day. And we can be forgiven. And this is actually the holidays that are coming up, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's all about trying to be better people every single day, every single year. And when we do something wrong, if it's a wrong between us, between an individual and another person, redemption can only be found, or you can only be forgiven by asking forgiveness directly from the person that you've wronged, trying to make amends for that. And then, only then, can you ask God for forgiveness. So you can't, if I steal from you, again, going back to using stealing, I don't know why today that seems to be my thing, but anyways, if I'm going to steal from somebody, it's not enough for me to just say, I made a mistake. I stole $50 from my friend, and ask God for forgiveness for that. I'd have to go to my friend and say, look, I'm really sorry I did this. I want to give you back your money and I want to make amends. What can I do? Do that. And only then can I ask God for forgiveness. And I think that follows through in terms of kind of salvation in the broader sense, which is the idea of how do we ask for forgiveness? How can we be forgiven? And it's through how we live our lives. It's all about how we live our lives every day, and how we can make our lives better by
Are you on mute again? I think
No, am I losing you?
yeah, I think you're
Uh-oh.
cutting in and out. Sorry.
Sorry about that. No, I wasn't on mute that time. I think maybe just my connection is bad. Is this better? Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just kind of went in and out sometimes.
Let me know if it gets really bad and I can try to switch over to my phone for reception, because that way I'll have cellular service. So let me know if it gets
Yeah. Okay.
um so how much of that did you hear so that I know what to repeat?
Maybe a fourth of that, and about the holidays being about forgiveness, and that like you're supposed to like make amends. Like if you steal $50, you're supposed to say not only, hey, I'm sorry, but here's $50. What can I do to make it right?
Exactly. That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect in terms of that. And it's so much about how we live our lives every day. And also about how we treat other people. And it is not really so much related to a messianic idea or the um or the acceptance of saying we accept Jesus or that type of thing. So I think that's an important point with all of when we talk about salvation and redemption. Yeah. Did you have your hand up, Christian? No. Okay. Perfect. And then any and maybe anybody want to share in terms of the Christian belief in afterlife?
Sorry. There's heaven,
Go
there's
ahead, please.
hell, and oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry. There's heaven, there's hell. You go to either depending on what you do in life. If you don't pray to God, if you don't believe in Jesus, down. If you're a good person, up. Basically, that's basically kind of how they divide people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's very good. And I think that's an excellent way to put it. Anybody know what we say in Judaism about afterlife?
I think there's like it's kind of like there's like you just kind of go. It's like more like how you like treated others and how it affects the world and what it'll do for the next generation of Jews.
Yeah, so we believe in some sort of an afterlife, but we also don't know. I mean, Jews are very much like we don't know what happens after we die. But we believe in some sort of an afterlife. Biblically, it was called Sheol. In the rabbinic tradition, it was sometimes called Yeshiva Shalmala. Sometimes it was called Shamayim for the skies or heavens. And what's interesting is that we do believe that all people have a place in this world to come, whatever it is. You don't have to be Jewish. We don't have sort of like, we don't say in order to have a place in the world to come, you must convert to Judaism. We don't believe that. We believe that it's kind of a, yes, lack of a better word, an open door for all who live a good life and for all who are righteous. So I think that that's an important piece of it as well. And also Jewish beliefs in the afterlife are incredibly diverse. We don't have like, this is the one view, but we have the traditional view that will say that there will be, that once the Messiah comes and once that there'll be like resurrection of the dead, that type of thing. And then there are Jews who completely reject that. But we also believe there's also some of Jewish thought that sees the Messiah as I'm sorry about that. That sees the one strand of Jewish thought that sees the belief in like what happens after life as someplace where the soul is going to reside after death until we are reunited with our physical bodies when the Messiah comes. So there is a variety. There's not a completely one answer to what happens after death. But I think the one thing that I would universally say that it's not reserved for Jews and for Judaism, which may also be a reason why we don't feel as much the need to proselytize, because I know I've sort of said that, but I think that's one of the bigger differences between Judaism and Christianity, is that in Judaism, we don't proselytize. It's against Jewish law to force others to convert to Judaism. And I think that is a big difference. And again, I'm not sure it's always because of some lofty, reasoning. I've already talked about that. But yeah. And I just want to add too, at this point, in terms of what Judaism and Christianity regard as our sacred text. So in Christianity, you have the Old Testament, which we would refer to as the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament. In Judaism, probably one of the most misunderstood ideas about Judaism is people think that because Judaism does not accept the New Testament as our part of our tradition, we have what Christians call the Old Testament that we call the Hebrew Bible. Oftentimes I get questions whenever I speak about Judaism to non-Jewish audiences is, oh, so does that mean that you're still doing animal sacrifices because there's animal sacrifices in the Hebrew Bible? And I'm like, no, we don't, because we have lots of other texts that have continued Jewish thought, Jewish wrestling with tradition after the Hebrew Bible that include, which we'll be studying each of these texts over the weeks to come. I'm not studying in them, but learning about what they are. But we've got the Torah, the Hebrew Bible. Then in the rabbinic period, we have the Midrash and the Mishnah and the Talmud. And then later we have a whole bunch of different codes of Jewish law. And many of those codes are still being written up through today by rabbis who are struggling and wrestling with the tradition. So yeah, I think that's a good way to put that. Any final questions? Because I see we have about 2 minutes left. Anybody have any final questions, thoughts, things you want to add?
I'll just say it was really helpful to just remind about Judaism's insistence on a way of life and following these commandments and trying to make each day holy. And the focus is on how people live.
Yes, very much so. Thank you for adding that, because that is definitely very much, it's about how we live our lives every day and how we treat others and treat the world. And I like the way that you said that, because it is all about how we treat others, how we treat the world that we live in. I think that's very, very important. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I think Rabbi Brian will be with you next week, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check that. Oh, no, actually next week we have Basic Judaism in person. It looks like, is that right? Next week it's Basic Judaism in person at Hillel. And I think I am actually teaching next week, I think. I'll double check that, but that's what it looks like to me. So we'll see everybody next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Rabbi Sue. Have a good night.
Thanks, you
Bye-bye.
too.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.